Hello and welcome back to another episode of 1 to 10. I'm Aiden Ackerman and this is a mega motion graphics tutorial. Today I'm going to be going over all of the best tools in Adobe After Effects. Let's get started. Up first we have minimalistic UI design. Here you can see a button that says click here. In order to make this button, first you have to use the shape layer tool to draw a rectangle. Then you have to go into here, contents, rectangle 1, rectangle path 1, and here you can see roundness is a variable that you can change. Now for the color, it isn't just a straight color, it's actually a gradient from the top left corner to the bottom right corner. By pressing this button, you can control where the gradient start points are, or you could directly type in the coordinates up here. The shadow, all you have to do is duplicate the shape layer. And let's hide this. You'll see I have a Gaussian blur on it. If I turn off the Gaussian blur, you'll see it is exactly the same as the button, just black. And Gaussian blur, as you slowly increase Gaussian blur, it gets blurrier and blurrier and it begins to look like a shadow. Up next is smooth keyframing. As you can see here, the button comes in from the top and ends up right in the middle. But it isn't linear. Linear would mean that it is a constant speed throughout the entire movement. So if we select these keyframes and click on the Graph Editor tab, then you can see this curve. And in order to create the curve, you click on the keyframe and you can select Easy Ease or convert selected keyframes to Auto Bezier. I use that one most. But basically you have these handles, and if you move these around, it changes the curve, it changes the speed. And if you hold shift, it'll keep it level. See, no matter how high or low I move the mouse, it still stays level. And if you drag these around, you can get smooth transitions. So let's watch this go through. You can see it slowly comes to a stop instead of abruptly ending. I can show you what that looks like. That looks like this. Not very good looking. So if we put in the curve, then that looks good. Now to continue with smooth keyframing, there's also realistic physics keyframing. As you can see here, this button falls to the ground, just like that. There is no physics simulation going on, just delicate keyframing. So if we look very closely at all these keyframes, you can see that because gravity is an acceleration downward, it starts slow and then gets faster, which is determined by this handle. It's a curve just like last time. Now if we select the Y position and the X position and the rotation, these are all important. So when it hits the ground, that is linear because it isn't slowing down, it's abruptly stopping. So that is a linear, well actually I think in this case I used a Auto Bezier, but it's still an abrupt ending. And then after that, it's an abrupt beginning of a rotation. And then you can see it hit and then abruptly hit that and then land on the ground. So let's watch that back. Next, I'm going to be teaching you about trim paths. That's how this little animation works. And you'll probably see in a lot of motion graphics, they use lines that go around the screen in a path. And there is a specific function that you use for that. So this jumbled mess of lines was drawn by me in Illustrator, and it's just a bunch of layers. One layer for this line, one layer for this line, and one layer for this line. So what you have to do in order to animate them is select all these layers, select Create, and create shapes from Vector Layer. Now these are actual lines, they're shape layers. So what you have to do in each of these is add a trim paths. I only did in one of them, but whatever. So now you can see if I drag this layer around, so now you can see if I drag this variable, it changes the distance from the beginning or start. So in order to animate it going from here to the other side, I'll start it like this, and animate it forward to here, and then drag this one up to about there, no problem. Super easy. Next up, we've got Track Matte. What Track Matte does is it allows you to create layer masks based off of other objects. So in this case, I'm going to have these two squares move towards each other, and have the colors change when they overlap. So first let's make a little animation. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this layer, make it white, then I'm going to duplicate this layer, and I'm going to make this white layer track matted to the layer above it, just like that. So now let's see that. Oh, I forgot, the top layer has to go down to here, I believe. There we go, just like that. So now you can see that the colors, that looks really cool. And we can make the middle one any color we want. We could make it purple. Now let's take a look at motion blur. In order to enable motion blur in your scene, you'll have to click on the Enable Motion Blur for all layers with the Motion Blur switch set button. Now we can select, let's say, the mouse cursor, and you'll see that there's this little checkbox right below Motion Blur, so we can check that. So as the mouse moves around, now it'll have Motion Blur. Yeah, I can see it. That was the Mega Motion Graphics tutorial. I hope you learned a lot and you put what you learned to good use. Bye.